This week, it's only week 2. Chris is in the wrong country.
Right, try and explain the French language.
Dan has ignored the week's topic.
And it's an unpeated finish.
Matt is butchering some poor creature.
You have a head's cut, a heart cut, and a tails.
And will we ever find out who the hell is Peat?
Hello there.
Welcome to an evening of whiskey drinking and whiskey talking with me, Chris.
Me, Matt.
And me, Dan. We as brothers try and catch up together once a week on an evening whilst drinking our favourite beverage, bourbon.
No, scotch.
Alright lads, whatever your choice may be, on this show we recount our stories, knowledge and adventures in pursuit of that precious water of life.
So, pour yourself a dram.
Put your feet up.
And join us for the podcast.
Right, is everybody audio, video good?
Audio, video, good.
Chris?
The classic lights, camera, audio, video, good.
Brill.
Except nowadays it's more like iPhone, tripod, iPad, good, action.
Filter.
We don't need any unicorn faces on here, thank you very much.
Oh, it got me.
Right.
Going the whole way through lockdown family meetups with Matt as a unicorn.
I was living my best life, what can I say? In fact, isn't the unicorn the national animal of Scotland?
He is indeed, yeah.
It is, yeah. Just to throw that in there. Keep it whiskey related.
Still on
Yeah.
topic, still on topic.
Bang on topic. Tangent averted.
So Matt is back in the country. A goodie bag came back with him. Chris has the exact same. If we start with that one then, if you just want to shout them out, Matt.
Yeah, so we've got the Ardbeg 10-year, the Kalila 12-year, Kilhoman's Mackay Bay, Bemore 12,
Bunnahabhain 12.
Lafroig 10, and Bruichladdich the Rocks, Lagavulin 16.
And coming back to that one, up my street, that one.
Yeah, I was going to say, because you've had a couple of Bruichladdis anyway, haven't you?
Yeah. And it's an unpeated finish. Not that that's really helpful for today's theme, but, you know.
No, definitely not. Definitely not.
Today's special on peated whiskies. Why Dan doesn't like peat.
Yeah, so that is the kind of core range Taste of Islay pack. One from every distillery that's currently producing. Obviously, Ardnahoe is the only one left, but they don't have a release yet.
No, it's a very welcome parcel. Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we could have got dragged up there with you and done all the tours and all that stuff, but saving time, just bring it to us. Why not?
I don't know. I'd like to go up. The other good thing about Islay Whiskey Hall is it's a bit of a who's who, isn't it, of our accent challenge. If we're talking Scots Gaelic, it is literally a who's who of tricky ones to say, isn't it?
It's definitely got some good ones in there. I mean, I've been calling Lafroig for like 9 years.
I thought this week I will collar Bonnie again. And I thought the Bruichladdich might be a good challenge for her.
Is that actually why she was so late to bed? Is because you've had her on the whiskey?
She's been in the studio for an hour. Do you think you can say Bruichladdich?
Bruichladdich.
Speaking about pronunciation as well, I saw a post about try and explain the French language, and it was like, okay, cover the last 3 letters of the word, squint at it, and pronounce the vowels that you can just about make out.
Yeah, I remember reading that.
There is a French word that might pop up later, and I'll try and butcher it as best I can.
Why are you recording in a cul-de-sac again?
Yeah, exactly.
No, it's just on about this rendezvous. Actually, there is a French word that is very much on topic for today's discussion, which I believe is pronounced terroir.
See, that's the word I was going for, Matt. Well done. I'm glad you're there already.
You were going to go with terroir or terroir.
Because that's very French and it's not very whiskey related, but it kind of is based around peat.
Certainly apply to, or there's at least a theory that it applies to whiskey. It just hasn't exactly been scientifically proven.
It hasn't transferred across yet, but I think that's mainly because of a dislike for the French more than the actual meaning of the word. But I think we should jump straight into what we're drinking.
Go on then, Dan. Kick us off for what you're drinking.
Right. So since we're doing a who the hell is Pete, I thought what's the only bottle I've got that is got almost zero peat in it. So I went with the Johnny Walker Black Label. It's a blend, so almost sacrilege onto the show, but it's I quite like it actually. As far as Johnny Walker goes, it's very cheap, 25 quid a bottle. It's full of minimum 12 year, so it's not that young. And I should probably pour a glass, but I can tell you what it tastes like already because, well, it's nearly empty. The reason I say it's got almost zero peat in is because it is a blend. Although on the nose you get a little bit of smoke to start, you actually don't really get a lot of smoke until the finish when you drink it. Mostly it's dried fruit and imagine sherry cask based stuff. And yeah, it's a bit vanilla, a bit toffee, dried fruit, sherry stuff, and then the tiniest little warmth of a smoke at the end.
I think that's coming from the Caolila that they're pulling from for that.
It's quite a premium whiskey for a blend, I think.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. I'm very well versed in how that tastes. I think I've probably made my way through a good 10 or 12 bottles of the stuff over the years. Very easy drinking for me, and it's kind of the best of what you can get in most pubs in England anyway.
Yeah, usually. But yeah, like I say, it's not very on theme peat, but it's enough peat to say, yeah, it's peat.
You've met the brief with the absolute minimum amount of work that you could put into it.
Absolutely.
I've gone Glen Scotia. It's a Campbelltown Festival release that they did. I picked this up in a whiskey shop in York. I'd sampled something, really liked it, but he didn't have it. He basically opened the last one and was doing samples. So then we tried to search for something similar, and I took a little bit of a gamble on this. It's quite a young one. It's aged 8 years, but it's finished off. There's peated in there, and it's the PX cask finish, so sherry cask finish. This one, very very lovely, quite powerful, and it's cask strength as well, 56.5% on this. So it's got a bit of a kick.
Very nice. So I've also gone cask strength with a bit of a kick. We've gone with the Octomore Isle of Barley, which is at 64%.
Nice.
I think that's one above a bit of a kick, isn't it?
That's a coma, I think. That's a severe coma.
Put you in the picture with, we're going to talk a little bit about ppm, parts per million, peat levels. Your Johnny Walker uses, as Chris said, Caolila, along with about 39 other whiskies in Black Label. Caolila and Lagavulin are peating around 34 to 38 ppm. This is done at 258 ppm. So that is definitely peaty. It's only 5 years old, so it's still very young, vibrant. That being said, it's still not a crazy over-the-top peated whiskey. There's a lot of buttery, smooth notes in there, a lot of kind of popcorn, caramel, some tropical fruit, but with that peaty, smoky underlying tone. So although it is ridiculously heavily peated, it's not crazy peat in flavour.
So Matt, you've chosen one for all of us as well today.
Yeah, so we're going with Ardbeg 10, which is part of the core line from Ardbeg, considered to be a heavily peated whiskey. 10 years old, 46%, aged in bourbon casks, and it's non-chill filtered natural colour, which is always a nice thing to see.
You can actually tell that though, looking at it, it's very pale.
Yeah.
Even at 10 years old, it's pale compared to most standard bottlings.
Hard to tell with mine, because mine just looks green, thanks to my lovely Ardbeg glass. I'm not sure if I like this thing or not, but...
And I suppose it's worth saying up front then, with a bit of a disclaimer, that peated whiskies are maybe not for everyone. It's maybe a bit of an acquired taste. there's a lot of different schools of thoughts around it, and I suppose we're not saying that any one of them is necessarily wrong.
It's interesting that you say peated whiskies might not be for everyone, because in the little bit of research I've done over the last couple of days, there aren't many whiskies that don't have some level of peat in them. There are certain distilleries that definitely don't use peat whatsoever. Glengoyne, Aberlour, Glenmorangie. Bunnahabhain has always stuck to non-peated up until more recently, where they now actually make two different spirits. They do a peated one and an unpeated, but their core line has always been unpeated. Bunnahabhain using a lot of blends like Black Bottle, and that's always been their unpeated version. But if you look at what we normally class as non-peated whiskies, your Speyside and Highland malts, a lot of those are peated, but at very, very low levels, where you're looking at 1 to 3 ppm.
So virtually undetectable. And I suppose what we're drawing the distinction on then is being peat, having the peat flavour, the peat characteristic, versus, okay, so it does contain something, but it's negligible. And Dan, you're less than enthused about the topic of today.
It's not that I'm not enthused, Chris. It's just that given the choice, I wouldn't be picking Peat.
It's fair enough.
But we give him Matt some grace because he's obviously been on Isla, and Isla's renowned for it.
Yeah, so we kind of must figure if there's a whole island dedicated to the stuff, it must be worth drinking. It might not be for everyone, or it might not be to everybody's tastes, but you know, it's well worth giving it a go.
Yeah, definitely. So, for the viewers' sake, what is peat?
Well, I think I'll take this one because the simple answer is it's dirt. Let's be honest.
I nearly spat my whiskey out when you said it was dirt.
Well, if you're going to be that squeamish, Chris, you don't want to know the rest of it. Yeah,
Go
so
on.
peat is vegetation and grass, roots, fungi. Isla in particular is probably a lot of seaweed, moss. It's basically that sort of trampled down dirt, compacted over probably 1,000 years, and it's on its way to charcoal. Basically, geologically, it's on its way to charcoal, and Scotland's full of it. So you hear about peat bogs quite a lot in Scotland because the landscape is just covered in this sort of material. Where it comes into whiskey then is they literally cut it from the ground and they use it as a fuel. So you could almost say that peat's an accident because, like I said before, it's going on its way to charcoal. You can burn the stuff, so it works as an ecological fuel. And in the whiskey process, in drying your grain, you can light it in a kiln and dry your malting floors with peat. The adverse effect, in my eyes, is that you now get whiskey that tastes like smoke and peat.
Which you are very, very annoyingly correct on that. I'm going to give the same information with a more positive attitude.
Go on then, try it.
Who'd have thought that Matt would be the one bringing the positivity?
Hey, glass half full. Always been that kind of guy. So you're very much right in the theory of the accident. So, as you said, peat is used as a fuel. It's on its way to coal. It burns. When it comes to Isla, they don't have any natural woods, forest, trees. So peat was pretty much their only source of fuel for their kitchen stove. So in the 1770s, you've got Donald and Alexander Johnson, who are the founding brothers of Lefroy. Before it was legal, they were obviously drying their own barley in their kitchen over the stove with their traditional peat fire, which, as you say, then imparts this smoky characteristic into the barley, which comes through in the spirit. They then became very well known for that smoky flavour, and people heard good things about it. They wanted to drink it themselves, and Lefroy Distillery was essentially born from that smoky flavour, which, as you say, is kind of a happy accident.
I didn't use the word happy.
As I say, positive spin. So for Islay, they all kind of went along that same process, but a lot of that was based on the fact that there are no other sources of fuel. You did mention as well about the makeup of peat, and it's the makeup of the peat that actually imparts so much different flavours depending on where it comes from. So, as you pointed out, Scotland has got a lot of peat. We're talking about 20% of Scotland is peatland, predominantly northeast of Scotland, Orkney and Islay. Mainland Scotland, you've got a lot of heather and wooden branches, plants, that sort of stuff. That will create a different flavour to Islay peat, which is predominantly seaweed. So your Islay peat will create a lot of medicinal characteristics, whereas your mainland will be a much lighter heather, that sort of flavour. And then the Orkney peat sits somewhere in between the two. So different regions produce different peat. Again, over thousands of years, you're talking 1,000 to 5,000 years for peat to form. It generates at about 1 millimetre per year.
So I suppose when whiskey companies are using taglines, like I've got one here on the Glen Scotia about the signature subtle maritime notes, so they're referring to it tastes of the sea. It's not just marketing bullshit then. There is some genuine science to that.
Yeah, so there's a lot of, certainly for me, there was a misconception with, so like Talisker, their tagline is made by the sea. You'll always see sea breeze, coastal air, salt mentioned in the tasting notes. Glen Scotia is similar in Campbelltown near the coast. I always kind of read that or interpreted that as when the casks are sat in the warehouse, they're getting the wind coming off the sea.
They're getting battered.
Yeah, but actually it is more to do with what peat is involved.
So yeah, it's more before the distillation process altogether. It's the peat for the burning, and possibly some sort of impact of the environment in which it's dried in with the salt air and stuff.
Well, a lot of it is it's the makeup of the peat. So it's what vegetation has gone into breaking down to create that peat. So Campbelltown, Islay, Orkney, you're going to be dealing with seaweed, whereas in mainland, you're not going to have that.
It's going to be much more woody, isn't it?
Yeah. Which gives you more of a sweeter barbecue smoke sort of style, which is also a lot lighter. So the distillation process is where you can really control the amount of peat that goes through into the spirit. Kalila and Lagavulin are a prime example where I think we've all tried both of these.
Yeah.
Very different levels of peat. They both use peated malted barley from Port Ellen on the screen here. And they are peated to the exact same level. The scale is the phenol level, parts per million, or ppm. They both get their peat in around 30.
Hang on, what is a phenol, and why is it the measure?
Right, so do we want to get into the science of this?
Well, go on, why not?
Right, so
let's have the blind leading blind. Go for it.
I obviously know the answer. I'm just curious if you do.
Well, Dan, hang on. If you know the answer, why don't you share it with the class?
Hang on. Maybe not.
So phenol, for those that don't know, and this is where we do get a little bit more technical than you need to, but they are basically the carbon compounds that form part of the combustible fuel in peat.
So it's the chemical result of burning then?
Yeah. So phenols, there are lots and lots of different types. There are kind of 4 main subtypes which produce different characteristics. So you've got phenols, guaiacols, syringols, and cresols. Depending on the makeup of your peat, where it's come from, what vegetation's gone into it, those phenols, glycols, etc., will be in different competing levels with each other and create different characters and flavors within the whiskey.
We're talking about peat DNA then.
Yeah, essentially peat DNA, and what it is that makes the character of that smoke then into the barley and into the spirit. So in the case of Caol Ila versus Lagavulin, where you're dealing with the exact same barley peated to the exact same level, containing the same phenol makeup, where they change is when they actually cut the spirit. So for those of you that don't know, when you're running your stills and the spirit's coming off, you have a head cut, a heart cut, and a tails, or foreshots, middle, and feints. And foreshots contain a lot of poisonous elements. They're discarded. Your middle becomes your whiskey, and your feints, too low in alcohol, that'll get recycled back in and go again. It's in the faint section where a lot of these phenols are present that give a lot smokier character. So just getting the numbers here. So Caol Ila doesn't cut as much in their middle cut as what Lagavulin does. So Lagavulin will start their cut when the spirit coming off the still gets to 72% ABV, alcohol by volume, and they will run all the way down to 59% ABV. Whereas Caol Ila, they'll make their cut from 75 to 65%. So they're not getting as much of the faint in their heart cut. So they're actually cutting out a lot of those phenols that are associated with the medicinal smoky flavour.
You might be right. We might have gone too deep.
We might have.
Was the science too deep there? I do apologise.
I just thought you might enjoy it.
To be fair, I mean, I Googled all of that like 2 days ago. I didn't know any of that on the island.
Right. If it's not being taught on the island, how important is it for this podcast?
Well, there are lots of other things that come into effect with the controlling the flavour and that, and a lot of that is the still design that we talked about the other week. And they do talk about that a lot. They do all talk about phenol levels. All the distilleries kind of go through their comparative of how high on the scale they are versus the other distilleries in the area. But none of them really get into that kind of DNA conversation of what's in the peat and how that alters the flavour. And they certainly don't talk about so much about the cut sort of thing.
Yeah. But I suppose what we can summarise with anyway, and, you know, depending on where our viewers are switching off or where Dan switches off when he's editing this, is that the same amount of peat can go into something, but actually you can be very selective with how much of that you want to get out of it by controlling the cut of that whiskey when it's being distilled. So it's about what goes in, yes, but also controlling that as it comes out.
And the other thing to look at, I did touch on it when we introduced the optimal. So just to refresh, a light peat is in the 10 to 15 ppm range. Your mediums are around your 30s to 40s, and your heavily peated is up in your 50 plus. This is done at 258 ppm. So in theory, insane overpowering peat level. But then what we don't know is at what percentage they're cutting that spirit. So we don't know how much of that peat actually makes it through. I don't know their peat process in terms of getting the smoke into the barley, because that is a whole other conversation. The other big thing that will change is how long it's in the cask for. So as rough figures, it's believed that a 25 ppm phenol content is estimated to decrease to 10 ppm after 10 years in a cask. Now, this being 5 years, will obviously retain a lot more of its ppm than something that's aged a lot longer, but that is another way in which you can control the peat level after you've already gone kind of high in the malting process.
I think the next question, really, since we've done it to death on the build-up, is Is peat a regional delicacy, or is it an overarching trend in Scotch altogether?
I would agree. It's not for everyone. If you want to talk about higher level of peating, your Isla peats, they are possibly an acquired taste, but then so is a very rich sherry cask. There are plenty of people that will turn their nose up at a PX cask because it's so sweet in those sherry notes. So I think all whiskies and all different types and flavour profiles are going to be acquired taste in some sense. Your heavily peated Isla style is definitely harder for a beginner to get into, but it's still well worth exploring because you never know what you're going to find. I will say as well, just because it says heavily peated, as we've discussed with the ways in which you can control that heavily peated, it doesn't necessarily mean you will get an overpowering smoky flavour. So don't let that put you off.
See, and I've learned a lot from this already, I think, because I would always associate, okay, a peated whiskey, and we talked a little bit earlier about how most whiskies have got a little bit going on in there anyway.
Yeah.
But I would always associate, okay, peated whiskey, it's going to blow somebody's head off. It's going to be a lot of people that aren't necessarily into the whiskey can appreciate the smell of a whiskey, but if you point something peated at them, they're going to go, what is that?
Yeah, it's
but
definitely
what you're saying is actually how that's controlled at the various stages.
Yeah,
it can actually be smoothed out a lot.
I would say the person you just described, Chris, is me.
Well, what's interesting with that is that when you say about the aromas, it can be very heavy on the nose, very smoky, campfire, burnt house sort of thing.
Burnt house.
Very speedy escalation.
These are classic tasting notes from like 9 years ago. Burnt house is definitely one of them.
Oh, I was just drinking a whiskey the other day and I thought, oh, a lovely spot of arson.
To be honest, Matt, I was there for a lot of the early tasting notes, and I happen to know that you've rewritten a few of them.
Yeah, but those original quotes are still in there. Things of dog rough and whatever. But the point I'm making is that if we look at that phenol DNA, peat DNA conversation, the syringold are only detectable on aroma. So you can't taste them, but they create smoky, burnt notes in the nose. So you could get peat with a lot of syringolds in it and less of the guaiacols, which are the ones you can taste. So it would smell really smoky and strong and heavy, but actually on the palate it could still be quite smooth with a lot less smoke than what you kind of expect.
I think most people would automatically think, okay, I'm going to smell something and then it's going to taste like that smell.
Yeah.
I would use an example here to prove that that's not the case. I've been drinking a few fruity teas lately, and they smell absolutely delicious, loads of flavour, and then you drink them and it's like, oh, that's just water. What happened?
Yeah, I'll get him off the podcast. He's chatting about tea.
I know, right?
You've walked into the wrong meeting, mate.
Says the guy who doesn't like peat talking on the peated whiskey.
Well, that is exactly why we're discussing who the hell is Peat.
Who is this guy?
Do we need him? Because I would have to admit, when it comes to Scotch, I do have a small expectation that there should be some sort of smoke hidden around Scotch. But for most Scotches, I expect to have some sort of fire breath at the end of it. Otherwise, it's like too smooth, too bland.
Could have been drinking vodka. What's the point?
Exactly.
Yeah. I think it does speak to that kind of like, go on, son, that'll put hairs on your chest kind of mentality that the whiskey has sometimes. It's that kind of that manliness of, go on, get a snoutful of that.
Which is why we all drink it, because we are three of the manliest men in the Midlands.
I mean,
that could be the title of the show. 3 manly men in the Midlands.
Well, we are after a name, so that could be it.
Yeah.
But that explains why I'm drinking a blend. And looking at your physique, Matt, that obviously explains why you've got an Octomore in your collection.
Because I'm so strong and
It's ripped.
Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely ripped.
definitely. Yeah, I mean,
You know, on the big peat
Oh,
bottles,
okay.
the guy with a massive beard and the muscles.
Yeah.
That's the archetype we're going for.
With that stereotype, though, is that a real thing? Is that like, because we talked about regions and they have their own signatures. Islay is obviously a peat region. How important is the competition on phenols or most peated? Do you have anything to say on that, Matt? Because you've probably seen them all. How much is the marketing across the distilleries, for example, on we are number one for peat, or does it not exist?
Off the top of my head, there are only two that I believe have made those kind of claims based around high peat levels, and that's Ardbeg with their release of Supernova, which I want to say was in the 100 plus ppm, and then obviously Octomore, which is a brand from Bruichladdich Distillery. Octomore is known as record-breaking world's peatiest whiskies. I say this one's up in the 258. I think they've got some over 300 ppm. They also have the Port Charlotte brand, which is heavily peated. But Port Charlotte 10 heavily peated is only actually done at 40, which is 10 levels below Ardbeg's core releases.
Yeah. And are they competing for big business there, or are they trying to set their own niche?
I think they do use the kind of ppm statement as a selling point, as a kind of look how big that number is. But at the same time, I think there's still a focus on, yes, it's a high level, but we do X, Y, and Z to keep it smooth, to get the fruity flavors through, to do this, that, and the other. So Ardbeg has a purifier attached to their still. They're the only one on the island that does it, and that to them is their secret weapon, the thing that makes them that particular style. And that does filter out a lot of these high medicinal phenols that we're talking about to bring in some smoother, rounder, fruitier notes into the Ardbeg spirit. So although they do talk about being the heaviest peated other than the special releases from Bruichladdich, they're still doing things to kind of counteract what they're producing. And Bruichladdich, interestingly, they have kind of three brands, Bruichladdich, Port Charlotte, and Octomore. Octomore and Port Charlotte are both known for heavy peat. Bruichladdich, they release unpeated whiskies. So they really do kind of cover all bases.
Yeah. Certainly when I found Bruichladdich, it was an unpeated. It was a Laddie 10 or a whatever.
Yeah, Laddie 10, I believe the Barley, the Organic, I think, is unpeated. There's quite a few. And then you've got like the likes of Kilhoman, they're peating at around 20 ppm. They only use 2 bags of peat a week, whereas Lefroy is using an entire barn full and they're going out and digging it by machine. Kilhoman go out, Anthony Willis, the distillery manager, goes out and cuts it by hand as and when they need it.
Yeah, that's one thing I've seen a few times is the peat cutter, the very stylized shovel that slices a little slither of peat.
The right angle that creates
a nice little slab, because then they lay it out, don't they? They lay it out to dry, and that can take months in itself, can't it?
Yeah. So I believe if you see it in a rounded tubular form, then it is machine cut, and if it's in that rectangular form, then it is hand cut.
So they are whacking it out with a JCB in some places.
Well, you'd have to keep up with that demand, wouldn't you?
Yeah, which is another interesting point when you look at kind of how much some of these people are using, and we know it takes 1,000 to 5,000 years to generate peat. There has to be an end point. So there is already a lot being done in terms of sustainability. And the theory is, although they use a lot, they don't use anywhere near a kind of dangerous level. So Lefroy in particular, they actually cut the grass and peel it back away from the peat, dig up the 2 meters of peat that they need, and then lay the grass back down. The peat below the 2 meters is too compressed for them to use anyway. And when you lay that turf back onto it, it will aerate the soil and make that peat usable. They are also working with conservation charities and this, that, and the other to ensure lots of good things happen with the environment on Islay. Whiskey process in general is very, very minimal wastage anyway. But Moore do something quite interesting. So they actually grind peat into a powder and put it onto a normal coal fire. So you get the peat smoke flavour, but in a far more efficient manner, using a lot less peat. And Port Ellen Maltings, along with Glen Esk and Glen Ord, they don't use traditional kiln fires anymore, and they actually use a closed room, and they'll trap the smoke in the room with the barley and let it go over the barley multiple times to achieve the right level.
So they kind of dehydrating on a mass scale then, rather than burning.
In a sense, yeah. I mean, you're burning and creating that heat to dry the barley out anyway, to freeze that germination process. Most of them aren't using kilns to dry it out anymore. So like Lefroy is using the kiln to get the smoke in there, but it's actually a cold smoke because the kiln is so far away from the barley. They're then using air blowers that pump hot air across the barley. And again, with that kind of environmental friendly thing, the hot air is generated by the heat of the stills. So they're recycling the heat that they use, that they create from one part of the process into another. So they use the hot air blowers to dry it out, and then use cold smoke from the kiln fire way down below to impart the flavour. But at Lefroy and at most distilleries, you'll see those big pagoda chimneys and all the smoke's coming out. Port Ellen Maltings doesn't allow so much smoke to come out. They'll trap it in the room to impregnate it again and again and again, and use every part of the smoke they can.
With Port Ellen Maltings as well, taking over that job from a lot of distilleries, how many distilleries do you reckon across the whole of Scotland actually use those malting floors and those pagoda chimneys anymore?
I wouldn't know a figure on it, but I can't imagine
as many that used to.
Yeah, nowhere near as many as used to. Obviously, we've talked before about like Lefroy still do a little bit that does about 20% of their production, but the rest comes from Port Ellen. Kilhoman still do.
I'm going to misquote you on that. I'm sure you said 25% last week.
Yeah, and then I read my notes this week, and it's 20% actually.
Actually, while we're on that, I think you've got an apology to make, haven't you?
Oh, what to? We'll go through the Lefroy story properly.
It is key to know when listening to this podcast for anybody that is actually doing it.
For anybody who is actually listening?
We're not 100%. We are winging it. We are completely, full disclaimer, have no clue.
We're definitely winging it. I'd like to say we have some clue.
I think we've learned a lot this week anyway.
Yeah. So late 19th century at Lefroy, so it was actually part of the Johnson family that went and set up a rival distillery. And it was them that then bricked up the water source to Lefroy, and then legal battle to get that land back to then allow the water to come through. And then it was in the 90s when Ian Henderson was distillery manager. He came up with the idea of Friends of Lefroy, giving everybody a square foot of land in that peat bog, which meant that if anybody did try and disrupt the water again, they would have to deal with thousands of leaseholders.
There you go. There is another reason why to subscribe, because if we don't get it right the first time, we'll get it right the second time.
Because we're on episode 2 and we're already posting retractions.
Yeah. Last time Matt blamed Lagavulin for it, and I had to jump in with a quick disclaimer because he wasn't sure to make sure we didn't get sued. But do you know what, Lagavulin? You're getting too big for your boots. So sue us. We don't care. We haven't got anything.
It was a well-placed disclaimer.
Yeah, definitely.
I think we should just go on to get back to what we were talking about then, Peat.
Yeah, I didn't do the homework. Classic. Yeah. But I do really enjoy a smoky whiskey, a peated whiskey. I kind of use it as that showing off kind of thing sometimes as well. If I'm in a pub with a load of blokes that can outdrink me on pints any day, I'll order a Lefroy 10 and get them to smell it and then choke, just, to show off a little bit, regain a little regain a little bit of masculinity that I seem to have misplaced somewhere. What I've kind of learned from this then is you've introduced me to this number system, this ppm, how much peat goes in, and then you've essentially told me that it means absolutely nothing because there's different makeups of peat. It's used differently to get that flavour into the whiskey to begin with. Then when the whiskey is distilled, we're taking different cuts to get a different quantity of that peat flavour in there. And then it's matured for different periods, which again can cause, that flavour to mellow. And then, like Dan, you might be sipping a blend, which has only got a tiny little bit of a peated flavour mixed in there with other things to balance it out. So we've really learned that number means absolutely nothing. It's just about flavour.
It does tend to only be the heavily peated whiskies that talk about ppm level anyway. If you just do a quick Google of, what ppm is Johnny Walker Black Label, or what ppm is Glenfiddich or Ardmore or this and that, you probably won't find the answer. If it's got a ppm level associated with it, either online, and certainly if it's written on the bottle, then you can trust it's going to be pretty smoky in flavour.
Just going to check my bottle while you're saying that.
Yeah. Just as a little side note on ppm, parts per million, ppm is kind of a universal measurement. It's not just for peat. And I really urge the Scotch whisky industry to use ppm, peat parts per million, which I think is just far more fun to say.
But that does make the measurement very exclusive to peat, whereas parts per million can be used for lots of other things. For example, if you're pissing in a swimming pool.
Then yes, there is a ppm. But again, that could be a ppppm or a ppppm.
Oh, God. Oh, you best have been recording for that bit, Dan.
Completely gone off tangent here.
Actually, is comedy gold's the best colour to describe PP. Anyway.
The point I'm making
is it natural colour or is it
written on the bottle?
Bit dehydrated.
Non-chill filtered. Written on the bottle is simply ppm, and it doesn't actually specify what parts per million.
Okay, so yeah, that should specify.
It's given that we're going to be talking about.
Is ppm phenols per million or parts per million?
No, it's parts per million. And as Chris says, it is a universal measurement for many, many things.
Yeah.
I also read a little review on a whiskey from a very angry man who basically decided that the peat was being used in this whiskey to disguise how young the whiskey was and how there wasn't anything else going on with it. It was just kind of thrown in there as there's no flavour to it.
I feel like I've read that review, or there's just one man who reviewed a lot of whiskies he didn't like with the same comment.
Potentially, I think it was Dan.
But yeah, it is a comment I've seen before. I don't know, but I suppose it depends on how that whiskey is marketed in the first place. If it's marketed as being full of flavour and this, that, and the other, and then all you find is lots of peat, then you've got the right to be disappointed.
It sounds like an Octomore, because that, didn't you say that is a young whiskey with a massive bragging right on a number?
Yeah, I mean, it's got a huge ppm. It's 5 years old. Why laugh at that?
Sorry, there was just something very evocative about its huge ppm. I'm sorry, I'm drinking cast strength. I wouldn't have laughed if this was at the start.
We'll do blends next week. You'll be much safer.
What was I saying? So I think Octomore use it as a look how high we can go, but still create complex flavours. We can go into the hundreds, 200s, 300s on that ppm scale, but still produce a lot of different flavour.
If we are summarising, then how complex is that flavour of an Octomore?
Oh, the Octomore, it's stunning, to be fair. Bear in mind, I've had this bottle since 2015, and we are getting into about 2/3 of it gone now, because I really, really don't want to finish it. Now that it's actually settled over the last hour or so, there's not a lot of smoke or fire or anything coming through on the nose. It is very, very rich buttery sort of notes. Very much if you put butter in a saucepan, heating it up, and the palate delivers the same. It's very smooth, very kind of buttery popcorn. There are notes of kind of caramelized barley, and then you get a little kick of ash and smoke onto that finish. But yeah, certainly if you allow it some time to breathe, it really does mellow out. And I think in a blind tasting, you probably wouldn't pick this out as being a 200 plus ppm level.
Yeah, for me, the Glen Scotia, there's kind of a big punch to begin with of smoke. It's a lot more like your kind of sweet smoke, your smoky bacon, rather than burnt embers, that kind of thing. And then that mellows out into you get a little bit of sort of treacle, quite sweet. Whereas obviously the Ardbeg is then that other end of the spectrum. It's very medicinal, quite. I don't know what the word even is for it, but just sort of a very light, kind of floral medicinal, but with the ashy kind of flavors in there as well. Yeah. So very, very different contrasting whiskies, but both in that same sort of genre of being smoky. So it's quite nice actually to have them side to side and compare the difference.
Yeah, I think in general, tasting whiskey is certainly, if you're inexperienced or you're still learning or experimenting with different styles, having two different glasses next to you is the best way to do it. Because a lot of people can't pick out particular flavors, but you can at least pick up two different glasses and say, well, that one's darker, that one's lighter, that one's sharper, that one's rounder. And a comparative tasting will give you far more information, help you to develop your palate.
I would concur with that. I mean, to be fair, I'm amateur hour in it because I'm drinking Johnny Walker Black, but I have given Ardbeg.
Stop knocking the Johnny Walker Black, because you know for a fact that is my drink and that I've gone through like cases of the stuff.
But Black Label is quite an executive bottle for a blend.
Yeah,
I think the Johnny Walker brand as a whole, I find quite controversial, but it definitely deserves a full episode, and maybe that's what we do next week. Because I think there's a lot of breadth to that brand. Certainly its success, but also some of its lackluster efforts at a bottle. Red Label.
Having done the Princes Street tour and having a book that I got for Christmas, which I still haven't read, I think I might have to do my homework and lead that one.
So if we summarise Peat, I have given it some time on the Ardbeg. I have tried to appreciate its flavour. Sitting it side by side with Black Label, obviously the Black Label gives me a lot more of what I'm usually into, with that tiny hint of the Caol Ila smoke. But Ardbeg as a brand, even the bottle, it's being a green bottle, it just shouts, I'm smoke over substance, and this is what we do.
So I think for me, I'd probably more leaning towards the sweeter smoke than the kind of seaside peaty, burnt flavors. However, I do still really enjoy them. Your Lafroigs, your Lagavulins, your Ardbegs. Absolutely love them. Wouldn't turn them down. I don't think I'd turn any whiskey down, but definitely a fan.
Yeah, I mean, for me, Ardbeg certainly, as I said before, it's the distillery that kind of started that peat introduction for me. I don't think it's my favourite peated these days. Just looking at the shelf, I have got a few bottles up there. Granted, the Ugadal is still one of my favourite all-time whiskies.
I think with whiskey, just generally, variety is what really attracts us to it. So whether it's, very, very broad spectrum, or it's a little bit closer, a little bit safer, there's still so many varieties in there, and it's good to just get a bit of everything.
Yeah, definitely.
Right, shall we leave it there, gents?
I think we've just about done it there, ain't we? I think if you have managed to get this far and you've enjoyed what you listened to, we don't have a clue what the release schedule on these is going to be yet, because we're still early days of recording them. This is number 2. But if there's topics and things you want to hear about, because we've opened about 10 can of worms just in this one today, if there's a particular topic you want to hear first, get it in the comments. Hit subscribe, hit like, all that shit, you know.
Yeah. I think if you want to start a lively debate, if you genuinely want to learn something, we will do the research for you and sort of add our own take to it. I think a bit of interaction would be really helpful if there is anyone listening to this. And if you got this far, thank you so much for putting up with us.
You know, Mum, thanks for watching. If you want to learn more about Whisky, you got 3 sons here willing to teach you.
She's definitely watching this one. She made a cameo.
Well, yeah, she'll definitely. But yeah, like Dan says, if there are topics that people want to hear about, we're by no means experts, but we do the research as we go along. We've got our own experiences and our own take, our own opinion on things, and there's always Google. So let us know what you want to hear about, and we'll give it a shot.
Slanger.
What they said.
That's going to be the outro now. You will watch the Unnamed Whisky Show. I don't know. I ain't really that keen on that.
What? Hello and how's your week been?
Yeah, I already. Yeah.
Who's going to introduce the segment then?
Go on then, Chris, because you want upbeat.
Cut.
Well, no, what I'm thinking about mostly is the amount of times I'm going to f this up, 1, but 2, that the editor is Dan, who will quite happily have me squirm and cringe watching these outtakes back one day. Yes, moving on.
Cut. Come on.
Oh, God.
Come on down, our one and only subscriber.
That's because I love you.
Not even subscribed.
A whole section on how manly we are, and then we've just had our mum come in and remind you to put the pin out.
Put the bit out.
Oh, magic.